one of the first things we need to do is really determine what are we dealing with? What is the situation on the ground? What do we know? What don't we know? And really trying to establish the baseline with which to operate. So what kind of safety issues are on the ground? What does the infrastructure look like? What are some challenges that some of the people have been facing? And really, where do we want to go from here? Once we've done that determination, we need to come up with some sort of a direction. And whether it means getting people back into their homes as quickly as possible, or maybe it's stabilizing the situation, maybe it's a combination thereof, and really balancing all those factors in a relatively short period of time and under a lot of stress with people that aren't always used to making these kinds of decisions and determinations. Yeah, in this particular case, because we were part of an emergency response, we were able to gain access and be boots on the ground relatively quickly. But that said, our ability to do the work that we need to do was greatly impaired because we didn't have a lot of the resources that normally we would draw upon, because there was a mandatory evacuation and many people were impacted, and so we really didn't know what we were going into. Certainly, the wildfire was still an imminent threat. Air quality was a large issue and continues to be. And at that time, we didn't know the extent of the damage. We knew some homes were lost. We knew there were some infrastructure impacts, but one of the first things that struck us when we arrived and drove from the airport to the Emergency Operations Center was how quiet it really was. It was eerily quiet, and we could see the impacts of the fire right, as we flew in, and it was humbling and really something that we had prepared for, but to actually see it is certainly something else. And so it was certainly a quiet bus ride from the airport to the Regional Emergency Operations Center for all of us. Well, it's interesting because I've had the fortune or misfortune of responding to things like Pine Lake tornado, Hurricane Katrina, the floods, and Fort McMurray. And one thing that's eerily the same is just that hustle and bustle is replaced by nothing and silence and quiet. And yes, it's chaotic, but there aren't people on the streets, not on the sidewalks. Everything you'd be used to seeing in a large urban center just isn't there. So that was certainly a similarity. In terms of differences, this is a wildfire that had a massive footprint on the environment. So we're seeing spots of that, indications of that everywhere we looked, everywhere we drove. Every picture we looked at had an impact of that. So from that perspective, that was quite a bit different because we were involved with it. Everywhere we looked, we could see the impact of it, and that was different. Well, the first thing we have to do is do an assessment from a safety perspective. The last thing we want to do is put the public at further risk and any other responders. And not only the responders, but the people from the municipality who are out and about, members of industry, all of those types of things. So we do a very stringent and as thorough as we can assessment of where we at. Where are the basic necessities of life? Where's 911 service? What do we have for ambulances? What is the fire doing? What is the air quality? All of those types of things we need to really carefully assess. And from there, once we have that, we determine what is the risk and what is the benefit for us operating in this environment. And once we've figured those things out, invariably it's like renovating a house where you do one thing and it leads to something else. And so we have to continually assess and evaluate what is the information we're getting, where is it leading us, and just on the fly doing the best we can with what we have and trying to determine what we're dealing with. Yeah, and a big part of what we need to do is really, as ironic as it sounds, but slow down, because when you're acting quickly and you're making decisions with very little information, very little sleep, that's where mistakes will start to happen, and you're starting to jeopardize safety of the people that you're trying to help. So it's critical for us to go in, take a bit more of a methodical approach. Certainly there's an urgency to it. I don't want to indicate that we're slowing down by any stretch, but we really need to start to create a framework and sit down in rooms with the key stakeholders and say, okay, folks, what do we know? What don't we know? What do we need to know? How do we find that out? And that's a big part of what we need to do when we go into an environment like that, because up until that point, it's run and gun and it's minute by minute. but when we arrive, we really need to take stock of what we're dealing with. And that the stakeholders come from industry, they are telecommunications, they are the municipality, they're the local fire guys, there's teams coming in from all over the province. It's really a holistic view, and that's what's unique, as I said, because typically these people would never talk to one another, let alone cooperate. But we get them in a room, we sit down, and it doesn't matter what agency you're with, we're all there for the same reasons. And to see that synergy and they come together, and we empower them to make decisions on behalf of their agency for the common good, for the greater good. It's a very interesting dynamic to see. It's unique, and unfortunately it only happens typically in a disaster. But certainly we don't exclude. It's a process that's about inclusion. We get them around the table and let's work through some of these problems and these issues. So we understand that there's not a lot of infrastructure there for us, certainly. So that's just part of the business when folks like us respond. We're used to working in austere conditions, so we have a sleeping bag and a cot and a duffel bag. And obviously air quality was an issue, so we're walking around with masks and big cartridges and working away on laptops or doing assessments, all of those types of things. But from that perspective, we certainly recognize that we're not in a reception center. So frankly, anytime we felt like the conditions weren't optimal for us, we just had to give a quick thought out to, hey, we're not in a gymnasium, we're not somewhere else, that just doing the best we can. So it keeps it in perspective, certainly. The breakneck pace is really something that people probably don't recognize. The minute by minute decisions, we're working 16, 17-hour days, and the folks that are up there are the type that we set our alarm, but we don't need it. We've been working for 16, 17 hours, but we're chomping at the bit to get back at it. So during the time I was there in particular, it was transitioning from this initial chaos to really talking about what does reentry look like. Let's start working that as quickly as we can, and what do we need to support that? What do we need to do to stabilize the situation safety-wise? Also, the fire continued to move. So you see ebbs and flows throughout the week, and we look back, and days turn. It's all one big blur, and frankly the reference from what happened this morning to in the afternoon to yesterday really becomes blurred. So things like our notes become very, very important. So all sorts of things change, but certainly a big focus from, okay, we've now dealt with the immediate life safety threat. Let's see what we need to do to get this community back up on its feet and start getting people back into their homes. Those are individuals from water, from transit, from public works, waste management, planning and development, all of those people we brought in, and really to leverage their expertise on what does it look like. Do an evaluation of your area of expertise. So from a water perspective, what does that look like? We've just had a wildfire come through a city. We've got all sorts of toxins and contaminants in the air that's now settling in reservoirs. What does that look like? We don't have any answers for that, but they do. And so they're working right alongside us. And whether it be the water people or industry, we really empowered them to tell us what the state of their infrastructure was, so that we could take that information, assess where we're at, and then start making some decisions on some priorities. And maybe a priority was this today, but over the next 2 or 3 days, it's going to focus onto that. And that's where we get all of the stakeholders together, and we're working together, and it's very, very impressive to see. But the municipality, they're the true heroes out of this, and I get that the firefighters and folks like us get a lot of the credit. That's not where it's due. It's due on those individuals that work from the municipality that were chomping at the bit to come back and help. And that was impressive to see. Are the basic tenets of what is needed to support a population. Things that we take for granted all of the time, but like a working hospital, water, potable water, things like as simple as turning a tap on and the water comes out and then we drink it. All of those things are not necessarily in place. So we need to make sure that those basic aspects of society are in place. 911 services, if somebody has a heart attack, there needs to be somebody that is able to go and get that person. If there's a traffic accident, that has to be in place. And obviously, just the basic fundamentals at a basic level, what is needed to support a population. Because if people start coming in, we really need the ability to support them as best we can to get their lives back up and running. And if those basic necessities of life aren't there, it shouldn't happen, and it won't happen. Part of my particular role was really the situation awareness, we call it. So what is the extent of the damage? What is the extent of the infrastructure capability? What is happening around the properties? What is happening with the fire? So the area that I worked in and supported was really responsible for a lot of the information gathering. So when the safety codes officers go out and they do assessments, that information would get fed back into my team, and we would make sure that we were essentially the source of truth, because we do have a lot of stakeholders at play here, and it's critical to have the right information at the right time and validate what are we looking at here, because again, everyone well-intentioned has their own pieces of information, their own parts of the story. Our job was to gather that information, and from there, again, a big focus was what is the state of this municipality, and what do we need to do to get people back? Because ultimately, this is a human incident. Yes, it's a wildfire. Yes, there were issues with the water. Yes, there's air quality, but we're really talking about the impact to the citizens. And one of the greatest challenges that we have is taking the information that we've gathered and really circulating it. And even before we circulate it, validate it. Because we understand that people are very hungry for information, any information. But we have to balance that need and that huge desire to give information with making sure it's the right information. And as a result, and I understand some of the frustration, I get it. Unfortunately, if we put out a piece of information that's incorrect or it hasn't been validated, that becomes fact. And it's far more difficult to refute that fact once it's out than it is to just spend a little extra time, or maybe a lot of extra time, to determine what is that information. And really the challenge is circulating that information to people remotely. Wherever they might be is a big challenge. And it's different than having a physical location for everyone to come and, hey, here's a pamphlet. We're talking about evacuees that are disseminated throughout Canada, maybe even the United States. I don't know. They're all over the place, and various means. Some have cell phones, some are getting their information from wherever it might be. It's a huge, huge challenge. And the interesting thing is, a lot of people ask, well, why do you do this? Because you see the worst. You see lots of destruction and all those types of things. And I see it as, I see the best in people. I see strangers helping strangers, neighbors helping neighbors. I see people coming from other provinces to help. And so it's the best in humanity. And what I see is the people from the municipality. Second they were allowed in, they came. You know, the municipal workers, the folks from water, the industry, all of those things. I saw them not disengage, but actually lean in and help. And that was something that was very, very impressive. And our transition to them was very virtually seamless, because they were absolutely willing and wanting to take this on. And it's a job that they didn't understand when they came back in. And there was not one that I ran into, not one that said, not my job, or I can't do that, or I won't. Quite the opposite. They said, absolutely, no problem. Tell me how to do this, and they're going to run with it. So that's one thing I'm really going to take away is the local municipality, the local people that are stepping up and taking this challenge on and taking it on head on. And it was very, very impressive to see. Yes, thank your firefighters, thank your ambulance folks, thank your police, but please, please, please take the time when all this is said and done to thank the payroll clerk, thank the director of planning and development, thank all the operations people. They're the true heroes out of this operation for sure. You know, everyone recognizes the challenges that everyone is facing. You know, every day that's delayed is another day that a single mom with her 2 kids is sitting in a gym, at a cot. And yes, the basic physical needs are being taken care of, but I can promise you the people making the decisions recognize the sacrifices that are being made and the need to get back into your community and get back into your need to get it back into a normalcy, back into a routine. That fact is first and foremost in everyone's mind.